In today's business world, change is the only constant, and mastering transformation is the ultimate key to success. Welcome to Shift and Thrive. I'm your host, Natalie Nathanson. Each week, we'll bring you conversations with CEOs who delve into how they successfully drove critical change in their organization. This show is sponsored by Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service B2B marketing agency. Welcome to another special edition episode on Shift and Thrive as part of our Go-to-Market Spotlight series. If you're a CEO or business leader wondering how your go-to-market strategy needs to evolve right now to meet today's market realities, this episode is for you. And I can tell you, you're in for quite a treat with today's discussion. Today's guest is one of the most respected voices in B2B go-to-market, including changes in buyer behavior. He's spent more than 2 decades helping B2B leaders understand how companies actually grow, often by challenging comfortable but outdated thinking. Earlier in his career, he was an analyst, first at Serious Decisions and then Forrester Research, which is very near and dear to me from my own time at Forrester. And through these roles, his foresight and expertise helped shape some of the most widely adopted go-to-market frameworks in B2B. Today, his work focuses on how today's B2B buyers actually make decisions, how go-to-market models need to align to changes in buyer behavior, and how AI is impacting both. He is the head of research and thought leadership at Sixth Sense. Kerry Cunningham, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Now. It's great to be here. Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
I'm really looking forward to diving in. And one of the things I spend a lot of time on with CEOs and their teams is really helping them navigate moments where maybe what used to work in the past no longer does. And I think often the hardest part is realizing that moment has arrived with enough runway to course correct. So with that in mind, I'd love to start with a transformation story, something that either you've led or had a front row seat to, where a company had to, fundamentally rethink how they went to market.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So virtually all of the ones I have from the last 12 or 13 years would be the front row seat, where I was working with the company, but not in the company, because I was an analyst for 8 years and really have the same job now. But I want to think back to one that's actually a pretty simple transformation that took place with a company in the healthcare software space. This occurred right after we introduced what we call the demand unit waterfall at Serious Decisions. And the keys to that, which are still the case today, are going from a place where you identify a set of accounts and then you go cold call the heck out of them, and marketing may try to run some air cover, but very outbound focused sales force, very sales-led organization. And under this new paradigm, what they wanted to do was, first of all, move away from, say, targeting accounts just because they're a good fit, to, first of all, understanding whether those accounts might actually be in market in the first place. So out of all of those accounts, let's say that there were 1,000 of them, which of those might actually be in market? And what happens if we focus our attention there and make sure that we're getting engagement there, and then prospect into those accounts? So this organization went out, and this is pre Sixth Sense, pre a bunch of this stuff, but they went out and they wired together some intent signals to start identifying which of their ideal customer profile accounts were actually making some signals, giving us some signals about being in market. And then they measured, and this is the really key point, they measured how many of those accounts that are out there kind of making some noise about being in market are on our website checking us out. So now we're getting really intelligent about where we're going to spend some time. And they measured the distance between, or the difference between, which accounts are in market and which are engaging with us. Quarter one of this exercise, about 20 or so % of those accounts were actually engaging with them at the same time they were in market. And what they did is, after measuring this, they put advertising campaigns in place, direct mail campaigns in place to those accounts that were showing signals. And within a couple of quarters, they got that 20% number up to about 80%. And from that point, what you've done is you completely transformed the effectiveness of the sales team, because now the sales team is only operating against, or is able to operate against, a set of accounts that are in market and that we know are engaging with us already, or already aware of us. And so this is actually a process that for them was relatively inexpensive to implement. It required a pilot program, of course, to get off the ground, but the trust that got built up between the marketing and the sales organization as a result of the sales organization becoming dramatically more effective from working on a set of accounts that were a much better in-market fit was tremendous. It just had tremendous long-term impact, both on their productivity, but I think in the relationship between marketing and sales as well.
I love that story. And really, just you can feel how everyone was newly working and all rowing in the same direction. I'm
Yeah.
curious what you can share about like how it came about, what led to it. How did that decision to go in this direction happen?
I think, at that point, part of it is having a leader, in this case in marketing operations, who was a well-known leader in this space, but also somebody who was a bit of a visionary, who said, I think we can do something that is much more useful than what we're doing now, which was, what they were doing then was really, I think, the standard thing that you would expect. They're crunching data to identify it. They had a pretty sophisticated ideal customer profile creation process. They had a good relationship with sales in terms of identifying those accounts and aligning on what those accounts were. So they had a good baseline of trust there. But then it had really been just, sales is on their own, essentially, with a little bit of air cover. And so getting the agreement to try this smaller pilot, doing that pilot effectively and quickly, and then rolling it out quickly. This is one of those ones where, once it started to work, even for a couple of months, there was a lot of clamor to get people on board. So I think that's kind of how it got going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, for intent data, it can be so valuable, but I think companies need to go in with the right framing, right? Like you can get some false positives. You can come in too late, like follow up too late if your program isn't structured to be like quick and agile enough. I'm curious what you see as some of those kind of most important areas to getting kind of an intent program right.
Yeah. So, beginning with the understanding that just because there is a spike in activity from an account does not mean that there's any real interest or a buying process in place. And so, I've talked about this publicly a lot. I hate the label intent data. It's just, it was asking for trouble, and it's found the trouble. What we're really talking about are interest signals from an account. And I think we've all been, so here's the big, the false positive that I think happens most often. I mean, we've all been part of meetings where, we're together with a leadership team or just a departmental team or something. And we're talking about a problem we might like to solve. Somebody has an idea. Everybody jumps on their laptop and they go out and they look at vendors and they look at, third-party websites, and that all happens. And it never goes anywhere because it was never more than just a thought in somebody's head. And maybe it'll percolate over the course of a year or so, but there's a massive spike of intent that comes from that activity happening that day. If you send sales reps chasing after that, they will hate you. And if you look on LinkedIn at all of the complaints about, if you just look at the conversations about intent data, what you're going to find probably mostly salespeople saying how they hate it. And if you look at the root cause of that, it's mostly going to be people chasing after these spikes that don't mean anything. And so, what was different about what this case study I'm telling you about is that it wasn't just here sales, go chase after these. It was, first of all, marketing. There's a sign that we need to get a company to come engage with us. They seem to be in market. So the first step is not send a sales rep out. The first step is, let's see if, one, this signal lasts, and two, they can put part of that signal with us, and we can see if they're interested in us. So the rush to get, everything seems to be about, how do we hand off something to sales? And marketing wants to hand something over to sales. That's like that. the culmination of everything good in marketing is I get to hand something to sales. But it takes a lot of work before you can hand something to sales. It's going to be worth their time. And that's the thing that I think has been the big mistake with intent data is not allowing it to be contextualized. It's great if you see a spike. Marketing could probably afford at scale to go probe that spike and see if we can get some engagement. If you do that and you can't, sales doesn't need to know about it, right? Just doesn't need to know that that's happening. Unless it's a very big account and your sales reps are there all the time anyway, great. Have them understand that there's something happening. Maybe they should go see if there's somebody they know they can talk to. Otherwise, marketing's job to either see enough engagement or get enough direct engagement so that what you're handing off is something that has a history and some context. And we can say with much greater confidence that, yeah, there's something happening here in this account. This isn't just bunch of people came out of a meeting and jumped on their computers to check out a topic and they're done. So I think that's the big difference that we have to see still. I think there's still a gap there.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I have seen some of that type of data go straight to sales. And I think to your point, like you need to uncover what's behind that signal. And I like your term, the terminology you're using here. What can you learn from kind of targeting it with ads or putting out valuable emails, and then look at that data and decide what gets surfaced to sales. I think that's very spot on. I'm curious to hear from you how you see these interest signals changing kind of in our current environment. Do you feel like, is it easier or harder to work with them? Are they getting better or worse? Would love to hear a bit more from you.
Yeah. So technically, we're still seeing the number of signals that are available go up. And so I preface that with technically because we are seeing, I should just say, we are seeing more signals. So buyers are not less likely to scour the internet for information now than they were before. Even though, yes, they're using LLMs, 94% of buyers that we asked said they're using LLMs. So they absolutely are. And vendor website traffic is down. But traffic everywhere isn't down. Lots and lots of third-party sites, the analyst sites, consultant sites, the journalists and all of that are still getting plenty of traffic, and there's more of them than ever, not less. And so there's still a higher volume of traffic that we're seeing that's trackable and becomes intent data. The other nuance I think is really important here is that when buyers are in market, when they're actually in a buying process, they do the same things they've always been doing. They go to vendor websites, they consume vendor content. They also go to LLMs. And what they've said about how they're using LLMs is that they're using them more toward the middle of their buying journey than the beginning. So about 44% use them in the beginning part of the buying journey, 58% toward the middle, and then virtually nothing toward the end. I think that's actually going to shift further to the end at some point in the future. But another key kind of data point here that everybody has to understand about your buyers. If you exist in an established category, something that's been around 10, 12, 20, 30 years, your buyers know you and your competitors well. And if you have 20 vendors in your space, you still have to compete to get onto shortlists. If you've got 4 or 5, there's almost no chance you're not going to be on the short list because almost everybody's required to evaluate that many vendors, right? But your buyers have been evaluating you and your competitors for as long as your category has been around. So one of the things that I think everybody needs to understand is your buyers aren't using Google and ChatGPT to find out whether you exist in most cases. They already know that, and that's why LLM use is more toward the middle than the beginning, because what they're doing in the middle is they're saying, all right, so we know that these are the 4 or 5 vendors we're going to evaluate. I know which one I like, but I also have 5 other people I've got to convince and 4 other people I'm going to inform. And so ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, can you put together a table that compares these vendors across these 5 things? And by the way, here's what I want that table to say. This is a part of the way everybody uses LLMs that I think we need to understand a little better. We don't ask them a question in a topic that we're interested in and then just say, okay, well, there's the answer. That's all I need to know. We engineer what we get from those things, particularly when we're interested in the outcome. So that's what people are doing with that now. Now, over time, could as LLM answers become more complete and trustworthy, could more of the in-market buying traffic get stopped there? I think it probably could, but I think we're a ways away from buyers who are actually in market relying heavily on LLMs for information. They rely heavily on them to do things like summarize the information, um, sort the information the way that I want, sift through the feedback that I got from the internal team and summarize that. Sift through the reviews that I got from G2 and give me a summary of that, right? Those kinds of things, but not, hey, can you find me vendors that make accounting software? Because if you're running if you're running accounting in an organization and you have to use ChatGPT to find out which vendors to evaluate, that would be very interesting.
No, I think it's great, and you're getting me thinking on, that definitely like holds true with a lot of what I've seen, especially when you look at like the bigger tech companies. But then I also think about kind of some of the exceptions, like startups, or if you're in a
Yep.
niche space. So take like the accounting example.
Yeah.
Is it accounting for doctors' offices, right, or something like that, where then Google might not surface kind of the most leading edge because that company hasn't risen to the top of Google compared to all the kind of more
Right.
general accounting firms. So it's interesting to think about, given your business, like you already established this is for an established category, when might that look different? And that kind of informs what kind of investment you make in marketing and
Yeah.
where.
Yeah, it's a really good insight. So I work with some friends of mine on another project where we're looking at how familiar are your buyers with your category, and then how likely are they to be familiar with you as a brand? So if you put those two things make a quadrant from them, it's really, really helpful in understanding what you as a brand need to do. So if your category's been around for a long time and you've been around for a long time, you do not have to worry about being on the short list, probably. You're going to be on the short list. And the question is whether the way that your potential buyers think about you is good or bad based on the long history that they've had. And that's a thing that you as a marketing organization, that's got to be your primary concern, is the brand reputation that you carry around. If you're a new organization or a new vendor in that established space, I mean, that's really hard. And we all know it's really hard because now you're fighting against competitors who are already where your buyers already have personal experience with all of your competitors, but not with you. Now, again, if they hate your competitors, that could be good for you, right? If you're in a space where nobody likes the vendors, and there's plenty of spaces like that, yeah, that can be great. You show up and you've got a smiley new face and a bunch of new technology, and there's some reason that you're existing that's unique. That can be great. But your go-to-market has to be consistent with that. It's going to be more a guerrilla marketing approach than a brand approach. You've got to get attention that way. If you're a new category, new brand in that category, that may in some ways not be as hard as the existing category new brand. But now what we're talking about is more about PR, analyst relations, journalist play than it is, and your founders and funders, than it is you doing the marketing and selling as an organization, right? So if it's a brand new category, you as a company are very unlikely to create that category and scale it by yourself. We like to think about the exceptions like ChatGPT or something like that when it did that, but that's not common. What's more common is if there's a new category, it's going to come into being because there are lots of people who've decided this is a good idea and trusted voices in a marketplace that, yeah, this is a good idea. You should look at these vendors. Plus, founders or their funders are often really important players in getting those messages out, but you're not operating at high scale there for the most part, in B2B anyway. In B2C, it could be different, but in B2B, you're not operating at high scale there. You're operating at a very low scale for a while. And then when that category matures a little bit and you mature a little bit as a brand, now you've got to have tactics that look more like standard marketing and sales. So it definitely differs depending upon that category maturity and then the brand size that you have, marketplace in the marketplace. Um, but when you look at most of the what most of the most of the money is spent, like in our research, about 77% of purchases were in categories where the buyer already had something in that category, and they want something new, they're replacing, et cetera, but they've got one. They've got an accounting system. Now yours has Gen AI built into it, and that's great. It's still an accounting system, and I bought those in the past. And that's where buyers find themselves.
Thank you for explaining that. I think that was very insightful. Want to ask you now about misconceptions in go-to-market. And I know one theme that comes up for me in other conversations is, um, how some go-to-market practices continue, not necessarily because they're right or because they're the best, but they've just kind of been out there for so long. And we know change management and change takes time.
And,
Um, and so from your work and your research, is there a commonly held belief about the buying journey that might sound right, but that you're finding is doing companies a disservice?
oh yeah, there's a bunch of those. I love these. The first one is, and I call it the blank slate fallacy, is what I was just talking about a minute ago. Your buyers are really experienced in your category, unless your category is brand new. But like for as long as the category you're in has been around, people have been evaluating that. Now, if you've had a really hard time getting adoption of anybody in that category, maybe a lot of your buyers are still pretty naive. But for the most part, your buyers already know you and they're already experienced in your category. And one of the things that I've been fond of saying lately, just because it's fun, is that your website is losing traffic, but it's not because of ChatGPT. It's because what's on your website is boring and it's not suited for the kind of people who are the decision makers for buying your stuff. It's maybe suited for who they were 10 years ago. But your content is probably all about how great you are and how you're number one. And your buyers have evaluated you 6, 7, 8 times already, and they know whether they think you're number one. They're not going to take your word for it. So that's one, that we have content and this idea in our head of our buyers as blank slates, as people who are starting fresh with no biases or preferences every time they go out to buy something. That is so far from the truth. It's ridiculous. So that's one. Another one, and this maybe even is more fundamental, so I'm just writing something on this. Virtually all of our goals in marketing are based on our potential buyers doing things that we would never do ourselves. So the most obvious thing is filling in a form on a website to get a white paper or piece of content. Like, your audience, Natalie, when was the last time anybody in this audience has filled in a form to get a white paper? Like, you would only do that if you enjoy ducking phone calls and emails excessively.
Well, and I think to your point, though, the content has to be really good, and the bar for what that content needs to look like has to be better than it was years back.
Right. But most of our marketing plans are built around the idea that we can produce something, anything, and get people to do that, And it's like, who are these people that we expect to behave in this way? And then not only will they fill in the form, but if I chase them down with a super clever 22-year-old, they'll take the call. And we can start a nice sales relationship with them. I mean, I think we've got a whole industry of people in B2B marketing who would never do that themselves, but who build plans for people who do. And who are those people? That's, I think, a very, very simple question. I think we just take that on board, we start behaving a little differently.
Well, and I think the point that you surface is, right, like buyers are people, right? Different people come with their own experiences, their own preferences, which is part of why you can't move kind of all buyers through the same funnel. And also, I think increasingly, and I was just talking to a couple of colleagues about this earlier today. I think a lot of marketers get removed from the buyer, let alone removed from sales. That's a different story. But forget kind of that important element of really understanding who your buyers are. What do they care about? How do they operate? What are their fears? And then how does that impact their behaviors? So I think there's a really important area there. And that drives, right, what do you create for them? How do you engage with them from a marketing standpoint?
Yeah, I think that that's at the heart of it all. Is you have to be much closer to your buyers. You should be. I mean, if you're in marketing, you should be talking to them all the time. It should be a very regular schedule of talking to the kinds of people that you want to be buying from you, and don't talk at them, but actually, talk with them, get to know them. Because I think that that's one thing that's just it's kind of strange. We have this idea of a buyer in mind that's a completely different sort of human being than we are, and it's not always the case that you want to think of your buyer as being just like you. If you sell engineering tools and you're a marketer, they're probably not just like you. But you should know what they're like. You should also know they're an engineer. Probably not going to want to take the call from BDR, Um, so anyway, I think that's a big one. And it should be easy to fix, right? It's like, let's be a little more thoughtful. Let's get to know our buyers a little better. We'll make different choices about how we engage them.
Yeah, I think it does put people sometimes outside of their comfort zones. But, I think back to some of my early days at Forrester Research, the voice of the customer was kind of a big
Yeah.
initiative. And just seeing the value that came out of that and all the energy, like, across multiple disciplines. So I don't know if any of that work was happening in your time there.
Yeah.
But I know Jeff Ernst was a big player there. And that to me was such a shaping moment of like how I viewed myself as a marketer and what was important like information to have anytime I approached kind of a new marketing environment.
Yeah. I think, today it's so easy because you can listen to calls recorded in Gong or in whatever system is being used. And then I think you should do ride-alongs whenever you can, fully remote, then ask to be included on some first sales calls and second and third and fourth, and just sit in and listen. And there's no weirdness, nothing happening. Just sit in and observe and listen to what's happening and understand how your brand is being perceived. What you probably hear is that your buyers are experienced and already know a lot of the stuff that you're trying to tell them. Your first call decks, that's one of the things I think is true. PM teams make these first call decks, and they almost all introduce the company story or whatever. And your buyers have been around for a long time. They don't need to hear it. Let's get to something. Let's get to my problems and not your story, kind of thing.
I'm curious to hear from you. What are some of any generational shifts that you've seen in buyers and how that shifts behaviors? We talked about it from kind of the category. You're buying something established, you're
Yeah.
buying something that nobody knew existed. But what kind of changes are you seeing based on just kind of evolving demographics?
Here, a lot less than what I think everybody thinks is happening. And so there are a couple of things at play. So one, in our last buyer experience study, we did ask the age of the respondent. And there are very small correlations with some buying behaviors, but very, very small, meaningless correlations. Um, People use LLMs at the same rate, regardless of the age. People trust them the same rate, regardless of age. People are using vendor content the same, regardless of age. Um, so one of the things that comes out of that is that the way people behave when they're B2B buyers has more to do with the company and its processes and being part of a group that is doing something that where there are kind of group level, company level expectations about how things are going to be done. There's processes and people work within those. Um, I don't think you see too many people, say even my age, who say, "Can you bring me a printout of that website or something?" We're all, if you weren't a digital native, then you have to act like one anyway. Um, so my answer to that question is always, I think, a little bit disappointing for folks, that we really don't see much different behavior from, the youngest buyers who are really decision makers are, now typically mid 30s or so. and then the average is in the 40s. There's just not that much difference between somebody who's there and somebody who's, say, in their 50s, who's involved in a buying process today. I know that we love to ascribe big differences to people based on this, but it just doesn't look that way in the data.
Huh. That is really interesting. My mind goes to kind of the more extreme cases, and maybe we'll see this over time. But I'm thinking of, let's say, my daughter, who is 9, so she's not a business buyer by any means, but has grown up in a world where, right, you can kind of do long form queries for a product that you want, and and almost like to a fault, like I want this green fidget with a yellow this, and right, and expecting to get exactly what she wants back. And then I jump ahead 2 generations to kind of my parents and in-laws and right 70s, and just a very different relationship with like expectations around what you can get and in what format when you are kind of making a purchase. So I wonder if it's the data showing little differences is kind of that middle of folks in the workforce making purchase
I
decisions.
think so. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah. I think all the people who are kind of in that middle are really going to behave more or less the same way because of the expectations of the process of the company. I will say I've got an in-law who's in his 80s and spends all day on his phone. You would think he was a 12-year-old.
I had a grandmother like that. It was very impressive.
I think, the other thing, people have asked for years about what channels do buyers like, what's the latest there? And we've done a lot of surveying about that. And the answer always comes back, it's incredibly boring and always just comes back and says, buyers use every channel that is made available to them and they think they're all okay. That's what the answer seems to be. If you put content out in a channel, your buyers will find it and use it, and they're going to tell you it's okay. Does everybody love video? No. A lot of people want to be able to skim from the top to the bottom in 30 seconds, and you can't do that with a video. All right. So people love videos. Yes. Some people love videos for some kind of content at some length. So I think when we get down into the real details of things, we'll probably see some more differences, but at a top level, it looks the same.
Yeah. It's a question I sometimes get asked in the sales process, like at my marketing consultancy. So what are the best tactics to use these days? Kind of what's the silver bullet? And right, the answer is there isn't one. And the best programs are multi-channel because different people like to consume information differently. Back to the point that we're all humans with our own preferences. You want to be on multiple sources, multiple places so that you're catching people kind of where they are. And then understanding the buyer, like the role differences, right? A field service technician is going to behave differently than a security analyst that sits in kind of a operation system all day, which is different than, go on. But thinking again about the buyers and what does their day-to-day look like and what are they doing when they go to do this kind of research?
To me, that's the absolute key. The channel might matter if you were able to control for the quality of content. So if we were to run an experiment and we were able to say, and we were able to code content in advance and say, this is good, this is not as good content, and then you put them in channels, you could run an experiment and say, you know what, your buyers on average prefer this channel. But it's going to be, in real life, the quality of the content that you put in it and how relevant and useful it is for your potential buyers, much, much more important than what channel is it in. I think that's the reason we can't get good reads on the channels is because it's really about what you're putting in it.
Yeah. Well, I think the risk now is bigger than it's ever been with so much content that is not quality, right? And so figuring out what to even pay attention to get to that quality content is harder than it's ever been. Hey, this is Natalie, your Shift and Thrive host. After chatting with lots of CEOs, one thing is crystal clear. Leveling up your company means having a killer go-to-market strategy. That's what my crew at Magnitude Consulting does every day. If you're trying to step up your marketing game, whether it's strategizing, accelerating your pipeline, expanding into new markets, or getting into AI and automation, let's talk. No pitch, no pressure, just good conversation. Visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com/Natalie to schedule a time. Can't wait to connect. I want to talk a bit more about AI, and I know we've kind of dabbled on the topic, but it's, obviously dominating a lot of conversations these days for good reasons. I want to ask, are there places where you're seeing companies kind of get things wrong about how kind of AI is being used or how it's kind of shifting expectations on the buyer side?
Yeah, so I think the one thing is that I think everybody thinks that buyers are using AI to discover who they're going to evaluate. And so, like I've been saying already, if you're in an established category, that's not the case. And it wasn't the case with Google either. That's just not how they're discovering you. They're discovering you by looking in their history, their experience, talking with their friends. That's still how that happens. And so AI is not right now the major factor in how you get discovered and put on a short list, unless you're in a brand new category. And then, yeah, probably that is more the case. The other thing, well, this is a little bit not so much about how people are using AI or should be using AI, but one of the interesting things I think that comes out of companies figuring out how to format and produce content that the AI will like best is, a lot of what's coming out of that, the AIs like structured content, they like FAQ kind of style comments. I'm like, well, don't human beings like structured content and, content that answers the questions that they have? It strikes me that a lot of the things that we're being advised about how to play well with LLMs are things that are probably just good ideas anyway. And when so right now, as a result of that, I'm doing an analysis of B2B vendor websites. And one of the things we're looking at is literally rating how much of the content is purely self-promotion versus thought leadership. Here's how we solve your problem. And North America, B2B companies, unregulated industries, it's like 75% self-promotion. So that ChatGPT does not buy into your self-promotion, and it's not going to, show up in what it says about you. And so if your website is mostly self-promotion, it's not going to have much to work with. The other thing is, if your website is primarily landing page and a bunch of content behind forums, the LLM's only going to know what's on the landing page. And so I think we have to think about how the AI thinks a little bit, what it's going to care about, of course. Make sure that we're engineering our content that way, but then also think, probably your human being buyers would be very interested in that content that way also. Your human buyers don't really care about your self-promotion either.
You talked about how self-promotion doesn't work. And I think that ungating content can feel scary. But I think what we've seen when we've done it for ourselves, for clients, it doesn't negatively impact the results, right? If someone likes your content, is in market, or wants to further engage with your company, they will do that, right? They can fill out the contact form. They can, whatever other ways to reach out, they'll find a way to do that. So I know it can feel scary, but it actually, to me, is almost kind of back to the original intent of inbound marketing, right? It wasn't put out content and kind of have forms everywhere. It was, if you put the right information and it reaches the right buyers, people will self-select in and kind of come into your fold at the right time.
Yeah, I think, we have to get away from the industrialized production of contact names, which is what inbound marketing became, and shift back toward what, as you're saying, it really started off being, which is, how do we help buyers develop a preference for our brand and our solution? That's what it's there for. But we got lost, and it really became a machine for producing contact names that we could pass on to BDRs and sales reps. And so I think that's the mission scope or mission creep or whatever that's called. It just way out of hand. And I think we have to shift away from that fast because your buyers don't care about your self-promotion. They don't want to fill out forms. ChatGPT can't fill out the forms. So, you need to do something else.
I want to ask you about something you said a few minutes ago. Just you were talking about looking at B2B vendor sites as part of a new research. I'm curious, is there anything that you're seeing that's kind of interesting, new, different, besides what we've already talked about, that would be interesting for folks to hear?
Yeah, I mean, so it's primarily that your website probably, unless you're in a regulated industry, your website's probably primarily self-promotion. I think this is one of those tragedy of the commons things where, you look at your competitors and they're saying they're number one. So, oh, geez, I better say that I'm number one. And then, I think we get that gets ratcheted up because marketers are competing to find superlatives to say about themselves. And that's again where I think we get lost. Like our buyers don't think that way, and they don't care. You're not selling used cars, and so your buyer wants to know how you're going to solve their problems, and that content is hardly ever above the fold on your website. And if you're in a regulated industry, it's more likely to be. If you're in Europe, it's more likely to be. If you're in a regulated industry in Europe, it's much more likely to be. So those are the kind of factors that seem to influence that a lot. But I think we need to, get a hold of ourselves. And I think it is a little scary because what if I stop saying that we're number one and the best? Are people going to say, oh, geez, maybe they don't think they're number one? But that's not really how. I mean, we don't. Again, think how a normal person thinks about the world. Think about how you receive that kind of content from the vendors you look at, and I think you'll quickly understand that you skim right past that stuff too, and it doesn't
Right. And
impact you.
it can actually backfire, right? Because you're losing trust and credibility right away. Like you walk by on Main Street, world's best number one pizza, right? Of course, right.
Yeah, yeah, I love that.
Sometimes I find converting kind of the bigger kind of B2B complex sales cycles into a consumer example sometimes makes things really obvious.
It does, and I think that one, there was a great comic strip from a million years ago when I was a kid. It was like with 3 pizza places on one block. One of them said best pizza place in the city. One said best pizza place in the country, and the third one said best on the block. Which,
Who wins? Yep. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I want to ask about a related topic. And when we spoke previously, you had talked about, from a different AI angle around kind of AI in kind of how it's discussed in products and services and kind of what does that look like for buyers. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So we had some hypotheses about why. So this year we found buyers are engaging earlier in their journeys than they were in the past. And we measured the extent to which they were using LLMs, and statistically, they're unrelated. So using an LLM didn't have anything to do with it. So we went out and asked another audience, are you looking for, do you expect to have AI inside the thing that you're buying? And then we asked questions about, if yes, then did that change the way that you interacted with sellers or when you interacted and how long your buying cycle was? And, the hypothesis was even buyers I've been involved in buying processes for accounting systems for 20 years, but did any of those systems have Gen AI built into it last time I bought it? No. So I'm buying something I'm familiar with, but it's got this thing inside it that I haven't evaluated before. And because I haven't evaluated it before, I've got questions that I haven't had to answer. Our InfoSec team is concerned about how you're training the data. Where's our data going? Where's it coming from? All of those questions that are pretty important questions, they all have to be answered. And buyers haven't been through that part of a buying process before. So what we found is that 89% of the things that buyers bought had an AI component to it. So like everything has AI inside it. And Buyers, we ask them, so did the timing of your interaction with sellers change because you had to evaluate AI inside stuff? And I think a net of 44% said yes, they engaged earlier because they needed to evaluate the AI, and they're concerned that that's going to take longer. The other thing that's happening right now is everybody's operating under economic insecurity, and that tends to cause us to want to accelerate buying processes. When we have budget, we want to get it spent. We also want to make sure that if there's, if I'm buying a new accounting process, I'm getting pressure from the level above me saying, all right, and I want you to find a way to either cut your staff because this new system's going to have AI in it that's going to do stuff, or as we grow, we don't want your staff to grow. We want AI to give us productivity benefits. And so you want to get that in-house as soon as you can. And so you're in a hurry to get the budget spent because of economic insecurity. You've got goals, and some of those goals are based around having AI do stuff for you. So you're in a hurry to get that done, but you don't know how to do it. You haven't done it before. There's new things you have to evaluate. So that's having a significant impact. It's causing buyers to engage on average a month and a half to 2 months earlier than they would have because they think that's going to take a lot longer to evaluate. And as it turns out, it's not actually slowing the processes down, and they're not changing their minds any more than they ever did before.
So longer buying cycle, but it's starting earlier so that the finish line is still at the same point.
So longer sales cycle, same buying cycle. So if the buying cycle is, so let's say that the buying cycle
longer
was
sales cycle,
10 months.
yes.
Yeah. So they're now 4 months of the 10 months are sales cycle, whereas before it was 3 out of the 10 months were sales cycle. But what's fascinating is, we ask buyers, did you put your short list in order of preference before talking to sellers? That number is the same now as it was before. So engaging earlier, they're still getting to that point before, and they're not any less likely to buy from that original favorite. So they don't change their minds any more now than they did before, even though they spend more time with sellers. So I'm doing a bunch of RKOs and SKOs during this kind of season for that. And a bunch of the sellers, the sales leaders are saying, yes, sales cycles are getting longer, and they are. But the buying cycle isn't. And that's something that I think is really important to understand about your buyers is, you're getting more face time with them. It's not really changing the dynamic.
Yeah, that is a really important insight, and not one that I think is commonly discussed or understood, and certainly newer for me to wrap my head around as well. I want to talk about sales and marketing alignment, an age-old topic. And I know from when we spoke previously, you have a different view than what's kind of commonly out there. So can you talk a little bit about that and where you think kind of the traditional outlook on sales and marketing alignment has missed the mark?
Yeah. So, going back to my Serious Decisions days, where the whole reason for Serious Decisions to exist, the reason it was born was to drive marketing and sales alignment. Certainly was a big theme at Forrester, at Gartner, everywhere. Yes, you want to have marketing and sales aligned, but I think what's happened over the last really 15 years or so is that marketing and sales turned inward and aligned to each other, but not to the buyer. And so you've got internal alignments that are really nicely calibrated, but they're not calibrated with how the buyer buys. And so they still don't work very well. And you still end up with these processes of cycle improvement and all of that they're just process improvement that really don't make a difference. So for me, the most important thing is marketing, sales, the customer success organization, all have to align to how the buyer buys. How does your buyer actually buy? How do they use your product? What makes them successful? First, align to that. And then there's going to be leftover things that you have to align on that doesn't entirely do it, but that has to be the priority. And I know that the folks at Forrester now are saying the same thing. It's not just me saying that. I think that's really been the big mistake, is just too internally focused.
Yeah, it's it almost needs a rebranding, right? Like a buyer journey alignment or something else that like does unify
Yeah.
around the buyer. I think that's I think
Yeah.
that's spectacular. So I know we don't have too much time left. I want to ask you really a little bit more from the CEO perspective. What do you see as a common mistake that CEOs make when they're trying to scale or kind of revamp their go-to-market?
I would say there's a couple of things I could think off the top. One is that the things that got you to where you are will not get you to where you want to go. And I know CEOs hear that and know that, but that applies to marketing as much as to anything. So the kinds of things that work effectively at lower scale when you're growing, even if you're growing quickly, just stop working later on. Or you get to, so let's say that you are you're in a new category and you're a new vendor. You've got to do all kinds of things to get attention, and it's much more kind of guerrilla marketing and outbound sales and founder-led stuff and all of that. I see that all the time, and that's great. At some point, that stops being the right way to approach getting new customers. And one of the things I see most often, and I'm actually talking about this a lot these days, is when you're a smaller company, it takes heroic efforts to get important things done, but you cannot scale on heroic efforts. You want as many heroic efforts as you can get, but you're not going to scale on heroic efforts. You're going to scale on being smart, process, using data well, using all of the benefits of the scale that you've gotten through your heroic efforts earlier, but you've got to pivot away from those. That's something a lot of companies, it's difficult to see in real time. And the better we can notice that, the better we'll be. And so that's part one, but I forgot part two.
Well, I know we've talked a little bit in the past about kind of storytelling and kind of continuing with your point about the founders is kind of the story that they're telling and how that needs to evolve.
So that I'm calling this folklore debt, if you will. So we all know what technical debt is. You go out, you buy technology, and that locks you into a certain way of working and certain kinds of processes in your organization. We call that technical debt. As we grow as a company, we acquire folklore debt. We acquire debt from the stories that we tell ourselves about how we become successful. And the stories about how we won in the past often are not the stories that will be about how we win in the future. And so I think there's actually, we're writing about this now, but there's a really kind of simple process. If you get company leadership together and you say, okay, well, we had our launch era. We had our scale up era. Name these kind of periods of time that are clearly different. And what are the stories that are associated with each one of those? I think it's important also in companies to celebrate those stories. You don't want to dismiss them or just get rid of them, but you got to have a trophy case where you take that great founder story or the heroic campaign that got us our first 10 million ARR quarter or something like that, and you put it in the trophy case, and then you move on and find the stories about how you become the $250 million company or the $500 million company or whatever it is. So I think it's really important that we do that because those stories that we tell about how we're successful really limit the options that marketers and sellers have. When the stories from the founders especially are this, how we succeed is we're guerrilla marketers. I see this in this company that I'm kind of watching these days, and they're just they're hiring somebody and they want this person to be a guerrilla marketer, and they're hiring salespeople and they've got to be the most aggressive this or that. So that's great. At their stage, that's what you got to do. But if they're doing that 5 years from now, they're going to crash and burn. And it's that story that's being developed about who they are that I think we have to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think that's a great place to wrap up the discussion. So thank you so much for everything that you shared with us. As we do wrap up, if listeners want to get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
This LinkedIn, but Kerry Cunningham on LinkedIn, there aren't that many, and I usually pop up. So that's an easy place to do. And I respond to most messages.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And I loved hearing so much of what you shared, and definitely the ongoing thread around buyer behaviors and some of those misconceptions and what's actually happening. And the concept of folklore debt that we were just talking about, I think, is a really important one, and one that I do see companies holding on to those stories for too long, kind of at the expense of news stories and talking about impact and proof points and all the things that we know are important for today. So, I mean, really, so many valuable takeaways. So, thank you for everything that you shared.
Thanks. More of that coming up soon.
Wonderful, wonderful. And thank you too to everyone that's listening. If today's conversation sparked something for you, and I'm sure that it did, please pass this along to another leader. We know these are the kinds of conversations that help all of us scale smarter, build stronger, create more resilient go-to-market engines as the world around us changes. So thanks again, Kerry. And this has been a truly amazing and insightful conversation on Shift and Thrive. I'll see you all next time. That's a wrap for this week's episode. For show notes and more, visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com. A special thank you to our sponsor, Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service marketing agency to help B2B companies fuel their growth. For more information on Magnitude and to get your complimentary transformation readiness assessment, visit magnitudeconsulting.com/getready. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.